I don't imagine that there are many Putin fans in the audience. Because when I even tried to just give a balanced discussion of Putin, I could feel the chill rolling from the back door all the way up to the front. So I'm not going to try to do that for you, but given what's going on in our country these days, if I had to capsulize Putin's approach, how he describes what he's doing to the Russian people, the country, the world, it would go like this. We are going to make Russia great again. We are going to make Russia really great again. Really great again. We're not going to be pushed around anymore in the world. He doesn't have Mexico to build a wall, though. But he goes down to Syria, right, to attack the Muslim problem head on. He's not saying he's going to make the desert glow at night. But that same kind of rhythm and logic has been behind his whole campaign to the Russian people since he took power back in 1999. So, there he is. I think you get the essence of it thanks to what's been going on here in politics. Another thing you've certainly heard about Putin is he says things like, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 21st century. You've heard that, right? You think, well, what's he talking about? I mean, is he upset because he doesn't have the mighty Soviet Union that covered 13 time zones and had a population of 300 million people and an armed forces somewhere in the range of 3.5 million to 4 million authorized positions? Is that what he's missing? Or is he striking some, is he telling us something else? That is, if you go and talk to the Russian people about what happened in recent decades, or people in Ukraine, or almost anywhere in the former Soviet Union, with the exception of the Baltic republics, they will remember that they went through tremendous chaos and economic depression when the Soviet Union ended. We didn't sense it over here because it wasn't covered well on the news. The economy collapsed by 50%. 50%. When I would go to Moscow to visit old Tетya Zhenya, we had a 90-something-year-old great aunt in Moscow. Her pension in dollar equivalents when the Soviet Union ended was $35, $40 a month. And prices, there was escalating inflation. Inflation during the first years of Boris Yeltsin ran to something like 6,000%. It was chaotic, really chaotic. Remember coming home one night with great aunt, you know, escorting her. We went on a public bus. I don't know if you see the real Russia as opposed to the one when you're on the tour bus or on the cruise ship. Just get on the public bus in Moscow, let's say on Saturday night at 11 or 12 o'clock. They were just like piling up drunks in the back of the bus, sort of like fish in the back of a boat. I mean, there were people collapsed there. People would get on the bus, fall all over the place. I had to pick somebody up, to get them off, a cousin, Lena. Just ridiculous. And then finally we got to where they lived, and they were living in an apartment on the campus of the Moscow Aviation Institute. So we're not talking about a bad neighborhood, but there were no light bulbs. People had stolen the light bulbs. Things were so bad in the early 1990s. So we're feeling our way along. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, in a major downtown part of Moscow, this is what it was like. You could see wires going out of apartment blocks tapping into electricity on the street. People were doing telephone lines into telephone booths. People were standing up, they were lined up outside subways with something for sale. You know, you'd come out of the subway and there'd be somebody selling a little item or some spaghetti or some chicken legs that Bush had sent over for foreign aid, you know, earlier before, whatever, just standing there. And then there were the mobsters, gangsters, opening casinos, starting to make money left and right. There was the privatization schemes where people could get together and make themselves instant millionaires in a hurry. It was a chaotic mess. So people remember that chaos, and they associate the arrival of Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin with the end of the chaos. So, when we wonder why, you know, when you look at the numbers from Russia, it's really extraordinary. There are public opinion surveys, and they're done regularly about many subjects, and Putin follows them himself. So in December, they asked, and by the way, the organizations doing the surveying are good, and they're respected. They asked people, well, was 2005 better or worse than 2014? And 60% of the people say worse. 60. Then when you look at what they think about the coming year, they expect things to be worse. Now, if that were the case over here and we were having an election, the presidential party or the president would be seriously worried, right? Because if the economy's tanking and things look bad, you'd expect a candidate to rise up and say, we need to make America great again. Oh, did I do that again? You're gonna, you know, when you don't want to hear that anymore, you're gonna have to let me know, right? But you'd expect that because people are saying, well, in America, when the economy's bad, we say it's the economy's stupid and we change presidents. Well, in Russia, the same public opinion agency and another one went and asked people, well, what do you think about the president's performance? The economy's going down, right? They're entering recession. They see no way out because of falling oil prices and everything. What do you think they say? They give him an 80-something% approval rating. So they don't blame him. They don't blame him for the economic problems that the country is facing, which is interesting. They blame falling oil prices primarily because they know that Russia's a petrostate. They blame sanctions from the West a little bit, but they don't put that really high up there. So you get a sense that the Russian political system, the Russian people, don't react the same way that we react to circumstances. It's different. There's just too much worry about the future and too high level of insecurity over there. So over here, we've heard people talk about the elections and foreign policy, and you can see the games that the candidates are playing and the media. You know, my goodness, we're going to be taken over by ISIS or whatever, right? You don't know when you turn on Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. It always reminded me of my mother-in-law, my late mother-in-law. When I'd answer the phone, the first word always was, oi. She'd say, oi, Robert, oi, Robert, oi, Robert. You know, the world's falling apart again. And I thought, well, what's the difference between my mother-in-law's first words and Wolf Blitzer's? The world is always falling apart every day at the end of the day. Otherwise, why would you watch, right? And then the candidates pick up on that. And all of a sudden, it's Obama versus Putin, and what are you going to do? You know, Putin's becoming the king of the Middle East all of a sudden. And we blow this guy up ourselves into this bigger, more powerful person than he is. I mean, how is he now all of a sudden going to become the kingmaker around the Middle East? It's a ridiculous idea. He doesn't have the power, he doesn't have the wealth, he doesn't have the troops. Can't do it. No, he hasn't replaced the United States. The problem with the United States, from the Russian point of view, generally speaking, is that we've got bad policies. Bad policies in the region, that create chaos and instability, and that we've just been going down the wrong road, and therefore, they complain about the fact that we don't listen to them enough, but also they're saying, really, maybe the world would listen more if you had more common sense in what you do with your interventions and overthrowing governments and the rest of it. So there's a little, message. It isn't necessarily, Russia versus America. It's partly a question of what we do and what they do in the world. So there's a school out there of former Soviet affairs and Russian affairs that would say, we need to look at Russia for what Russia really is, as opposed to some idealized version of Russia we have in our head. And then deal with them. I mean, Kissinger is this way. There's a fellow named Thomas Graham who thinks this way. He works for Kissinger. And I suggest that probably we ought to as well. Stop imagining that Russia is just waiting to become a democracy and there's just this person, Putin, standing in the way of it all. I don't see it. I'll give you a little more information here about recent Russian public opinion. This is a fascinating one. If Russian society were just waiting to become democratic and you asked the Russian public, name the countries that we should learn the most from, what would they name these days? They should name us, right? Or Denmark or Sweden or Germany or somewhere. They named China this year. Woo. China, right? 2% named us. So if you'd contrast what happened over the last decade and a half, what you're getting a sense in Russia is that, well, there's America over there and all, and it would be nice to live like that, but we can't get there, given what we are with all our problems. And that if you're looking for some place where the economy is growing and there's reasonable stability and prosperity, maybe China is the place to learn from. And that's not very good news to those who imagine that we can simply implant democracy, American style, in Russia. So we should not think that we can do that as a point of view. I share. What about, I think the last time I spoke here, maybe I got up waiting, there was a speaker coming a little late, and I talked to you about Boris Nemtsov's murder. Remember there was the Russian dissident. He was walking home with his girlfriend right outside the Kremlin, right, where there are cameras everywhere. And all of a sudden, a car positioned itself, or a snowplow or something, perfectly to block the cameras. And then when it moved on, he was dead. And he was preparing reports that would reveal Putin's more direct involvement in the conflict in Ukraine. He was collecting stories about specific soldiers, people who were killed, people who were wounded, and preparing a white paper that was supposed to be shocking news. And he died. So that was an event of 2015. Now you'd say, well, if you ask the Russian public what were the most important events in 2015, His murder got 8%. Generally speaking, there is not a lot of sympathy for the people that we like over here and that we prominently feature as dissidents. Well, it's easy to explain in some ways. If people are afraid of chaos, they mistrust the dissidents. They think that by getting out there and having big demonstrations, they're going to bring Russia to the chaos of the 1990s again. That's part of it. But the other thing is, imagine a country now where the news media is pretty much state-controlled. What Putin was able to do after as he emerged as the leader in the Kremlin was to bring the most important news programs, television stations, under his control, either direct or indirect. By indirect, I would say, for example, if a tycoon or an oligarch owns a news empire, and the oligarch wants to keep his money and stay out of jail and get along with the government, he can help shape the way the news is presented. Or the government can own the news media by owning 51% of a holding company that owns the media. So therefore, the public does not get to hear discussions led by dissidents on the evening news, on the talk shows at night, etc. Well, there are some people out there who could discuss Russia's problems very intelligently, push the democratic line. They are not going to get access to the mainline channels in Russia, period. They're not on. And the people who regret the killing of reporters and others who have been outspoken, and there's a whole list of them, they're not on either. So if you're not hearing day in and day out, you know that it's a horrible thing that Nemtsov was killed, or Starovoytova was killed, or any number were killed, you tend not to notice it. And you pick up this party line, which is, well, they're just troublemakers and probably they're paid by Westerners or whatever. You get, when you do the public opinion surveys in Russia, you get about 10% who are willing to be critical and who will come out, and demonstrate and all, but most of the people are more worried about where their job is going to be next week, their salaries, security. They want stability in the country. They're afraid of terrorism. So they rally around the strong leader because he will protect them and he will make Russia great again. That's his promise. And his legitimacy stems primarily from what happened from 1999 until the last year or two. That is to say, and by the way, they do the surveying. So if you go back to the early 1990s, people were worried about crime, criminality, a general kind of societal chaos. They're a little less worried about that now, but they're still worried about the recurring depression because they can see that their country's pretty much stuck as a petrostate dependent on oil and natural gas income. So, the petrostate. Indeed, discussions of oil pricing are always there on the Russian news shows and the business channels. And by the way, the business channel is probably the most objective place to get general news from Russia, and it's excellent. It goes 24 hours a day. Russian business channel. It's in Russian. No, but it's excellent. And they picked up everything, all the jargon you needed to learn about following markets and IPOs and all the rest of it. They've got it. It's very clear, that there is a group of very well-educated, smart people who are involved in economics and trading and business in Russia. They are there. There is that kind of a well-educated, informed elite. They need sound information to make their business decisions. Their business channel provides them with good information. But similarly, the business channel rarely takes a direct shot at Putin. Even they don't do that. They might discuss policy, pros and cons, but they don't get into the direct assault on him or on potential criminality in his ranks or any of that. They'll focus on pragmatic business news that they can use and basically agree with the idea that Russia needs a tough, strong leader to maintain stability, otherwise we all suffer. So the strong leader idea and principle is there. So who is this Putin? If we go back and we look at him, he's a very unlikely candidate to become someone who would have been named by Forbes and other news magazines and organizations as the most influential man in the world a couple of years ago, right? That wasn't too long ago, was it? We were seeing him up there. He was born in Leningrad, which is now called St. Petersburg, into a very poor family. Now this was not, it was a typical poor family in the city. The family had a 180 square foot, one-room apartment in a tenement, essentially. A poor tenement that they had carved up old 19th century buildings into lots of little apartments. The people didn't have their own bathrooms in their apartments. They didn't have their own kitchens in their apartments. Essentially, it's like a dormitory room or something where you have to go to the bathroom and all, but even then, compared to what you have in a typical American dormitory, those conditions were pretty terrible. There's just some kind of a dirty bathroom down the end of the corridor, and everybody's using it. Everybody's sharing a kitchen. They live in a little, there's a courtyard there where the kids hang out and where the boys are in gangs. Putin's parents, not well educated, unlike Medvedev, who was president. Remember for 4 years how well spoken he was, how he handled himself. His parents, if you want to get into personal psychology, they weren't affectionate at all. They had been through such a hard time with World War II, with children dying, with relatives dying, you know, fighting the Nazis and people wounded and really in pain because of poor medical services for the old timers from World War II, his dad. Just not a happy, rich environment at all, just quite the opposite. So out on the street, if you can imagine in a situation like this with the tenements, the boys were always fighting. So he was into little gang fights all the time, and since he was small, he really had to fight and be a scrapper. And when he remembers all of this, he doesn't mind telling people that he really had a terrible temper. If anybody insulted him, he would like to attack immediately, and he'd get in fights. He got in fights in school, he got in fights in the courtyard. What turned his life around was judo. He got a coach, he learned self-discipline, he started studying again, and then he started dreaming of becoming a KGB officer. He wanted to join the KGB. The KGB didn't come after him, he went after them. He would go over to them and say, well, what do I need to do to become a KGB officer? And they'd say, well, you've got to go to the university. And then, you know, we'll be in touch with you. So he studied hard, miraculously passed certain exams, got in the university. When he's graduating from the university, people showed up as they used to do over there. They'd come and like say, "Come on over, Bob, we want to have a chat with you." And all of a sudden, they're recruiting you. So instead of going into the armed forces, as lots of kids did, he went into the KGB. He got his training, and then his first assignment was Germany. So he was put in Dresden in Germany. He didn't have a top-level assignment or even a top-level career path ahead of him. He was kind of posted over in Dresden. His job was to find ways to spy on the United States and West Germany, look for people who could provide information, etc. So no one would have said that that guy over there posted to a KGB post in Dresden, Germany, in East Germany, was going to rise. He didn't have the great family background. He hadn't graduated from some elite program, and he was sort of, at a pretty low level in the KGB. So then when the end of the Soviet Union came, when Gorbachev was doing glasnost and perestroika, he was over there in Germany. And people say that he developed an attitude of mistrust, anger at the people who changed the Soviet Union and took the Soviet Union away, and all the guarantees and what he was hoping for. And fear of mobs, because democratic movements in Germany started, remember tearing down the wall and demonstrations and the rest of it? Well, eventually they came after the KGB offices, the security offices in Dresden. And Putin watched this situation, and he watched offices being assaulted. He watched people losing their jobs because they had been working for the Russians in East Germany and the rest of it, and kind of chaos. And he went back home to St. Petersburg, and as luck would have it, is it luck or did the KGB do this for him? He got a job in City Hall with Mayor Sobchak, who was supposedly a leader of the democratic movement. Was he there to keep an eye on the mayor or what? It's hard to tell. But he was in there, and when he got in there, what was going on at this time when he went back to Russia in the early 1990s, or in 89, 90, 91, 92, 93? What were they doing? The central offices, like the mayor of Moscow, the mayor of St. Petersburg, or even the Kremlin after they overthrew Gorbachev in Moscow, these were factories that were producing millionaires and billionaires. That's where the energy was, because the mayor now would have an ability to influence who got to privatize this, who got to privatize that. And when you go and search for things that Putin was into, the feeding frenzy for privatization was going on at the same time that stores didn't have the basic foods and necessities that the city needed. So Putin could get an assignment, for example, you've got to find a way to pay for a big importation of food from Germany and Scandinavia. Where is he going to get the money? He would end up having the right to negotiate for the sale of some commodity to the West, whether it be some valuable metals or timber or whatever. So they would go and sell that stuff, and at the same time, by the way, have kickbacks and lots of money and general corruption, and then get some food and put it on the shelves, in Leningrad. That kind of stuff. He was dealing with the problem of who gets to have a casino and where in Leningrad. Again, there'll be kickbacks on all of this. So Mayor Sobchak, whom we remember as a great democratizer, was in on all of this stuff. Putin was in his office working on this kind of thing as well. So wealth, power, corrupt politics, a democracy that seemed dirty, greedy, corrupt, unfair, the worst kind of political scandals possible, people being shot, moved aside, all that kind of stuff was going on there. So he was in the middle of that. And then Sobchak himself got in trouble because of all of this fighting, ended up losing the mayoralty. Putin landed himself after that a job in the Kremlin. And when he got into the Kremlin, he was put into an office called Presidential Administration. Used to be the old KGB, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, renamed itself Presidential Administration Building. And where did he land in there? Right in the middle of the privatization stuff. So the moves that created the big oligarchs who became billionaires by getting their hands on oil companies, gas companies, and the rest of it, Putin knew them all. He knew that stuff. We're unable to nail him on having run off with billions on his own, but the knowledge of who got what and who was involved in what scheme later served him very well. Because as the chaos developed with the drunken Boris Yeltsin, remember they had a drunken president, Boris Yeltsin? The new oligarchs became frightened because they were becoming millionaires and billionaires, and yet they could be threatened by a counter-revolution of angry people who were tired of being poor, tired of having inflation, and they would want to overthrow the whole thing and somehow, I don't know what, put Russia back together again, give themselves some security. Yeltsin would just get angry at the mess, and he had fired 4 prime ministers within 4 years. Meanwhile, Putin was working very hard in there, showing people that he was a hard worker, he was determined, he got involved in security affairs, lots of things. He was one of the hardest working people. Not drinking, not smoking, just working his butt off 24 hours a day, making himself indispensable. Now this is interesting because he made himself indispensable by working really hard. You wonder how was this possible, because he had been a nobody in Dresden, and now in the Kremlin he made himself indispensable behind the scenes, being loyal to Yeltsin and others, keeping his mouth shut about a lot of the dirty dealing, getting the job done when he was told to do X or told to do Y, becoming indispensable. Meanwhile, the oligarchs were fighting with each other. They couldn't decide on whom to push forward to become prime minister, one oligarch or another, and somebody decided to talk up making Vladimir Putin the prime minister of Russia. And they did. Yeltsin did. It's pretty amazing. So here he is. He had never really held any serious public office, never campaigned anywhere, and all of a sudden he's prime minister of Russia. And we're all wondering, where did this guy come from, right? And that's when he really started to bloom. You had the Chechen War, there were terrorist attacks in Moscow, there was, Russia was faced with the problem of potential disintegration and battles with Muslim radicals. And believe me, they were coming up there from the Middle East into Russia to this fighting. So Putin became commander-in-chief, in effect, of a war against the Chechen rebels. And what he did is he got with the military officers and he courted them. I will support you, you do what it takes, and I will make sure that I have your back. And that meant if you had to blast the hell out of cities in Chechnya, town by town, do it, because I want them defeated, and I will support you as you defeat them. Really a tough pro-military, pro-security stand. And they smashed the rebels. They smashed the region, but they smashed the rebels. And he hunted them down, leaders one after another, and got rid of them, liquidated them. And at the same time, world oil prices started rising because of China's development. And the money started flowing into the Kremlin. And now Putin, instead of being the puppet of the oligarchs, decided, well, I am going to really be the ruler of Russia. And in order to do that, he had to get the oligarchs under his control. The KGB were his friends, right? Military were his friends because of his behavior. And now he started using the tax system in Russia and the courts to tame the oligarchs. He called a bunch of them in, 1,500 or so, and his friend Stepashin, who was running the tax operation for him, they just said, well, essentially, we've got the dope on all of you, and if you don't cooperate, we'll take you to court, strip you of your wealth, and that'll be that. You had to make an example of someone. That's where the Khodorkovsky case came in. Remember Yukos, the oil, and all of that? Because if he didn't arrest and strip somebody, they wouldn't be frightened. So, you know, from then on, imagine now he's got the KGB, he's got the military supporting him. He was building his control over the media through controlling the oligarchs, and he's got the oligarchs dependent on him to keep their money. So you can see he's got the big money, he's got the armed forces, he's got the security, and he's got enough influence over the media that there he is. Now he really is a ruler who's got leverage so that he's not just bought by the oligarchs, but he's got an ability to maneuver on his own. And that's essentially where he has been. His use of the media, just short of amazing. If you watch the Russian news, you've got Sheriff Vladimir Putin. If there's anything, he loves to go around and expose crooks and criminals. So every week on the news, you'll see he flies out somewhere. He sits at the table and he scowls like this. And he loves note cards. And he reads this and he said, well, I see over here you got, 800 billion rubles to spend on the construction of whatever. The money has been spent. The project isn't done. What do you say for yourself? And then fire him. Well, the common people say, yeah, we've got those crooks and those thugs out there, but we've got Putin defending us, right? And then he goes to the next place, where if there's a disaster, he shows up. So he's constantly moving around, showing that he is the only one protecting the people from these greedy local crooks. And then also, region by region, it's very well understood that you join my political party and you support it, or you could be the next one to go. So he built this powerful one-party system called Russia United. And if you want anything from City Hall or the government, you had better be part of Russia United. So look what we've got now. As the years went by, he rebuilds a one-party system using the media and going after corruption, because without corruption, how would he have leverage? Corruption is the best thing for him because now everybody's guilty and they all have to listen when he calls up. Because if he calls them up and he asks for their support, they don't give it, well, the tax man will show up or someone else will show up. So now you've got to cooperate with them. You can't be too greedy. You can't be too greedy in public. You have to do things for the general people. He puts a message out so that I'm here protecting you, the Russian people, and I'm also protecting you, the oligarchs, because if you don't cooperate with me, the people will be angry too, and they could rise up and overthrow you and whatever. So he's playing these very interesting political games. Getting the people to support him, that means he needs victims to fire all the time. So he does that. He doesn't miss a natural disaster. He shows up. He's not his Mr. Warmth, but he will say, okay, what are you doing over here? I want, 2,000 new houses built for the people who lost their homes in this flood. Then he comes back 6 months later, gets on TV. Where are the houses? Some money spent, get the houses built. So that kind of thing makes him popular. Now what about Putin the He-Man? Now that he's a little more relaxed, he lets reporters even ask him about that. He said, of course, I'm doing this thing, I'm going up there, people are laughing about this, but I'm doing it on purpose because Russia was drunken, Russia was weak. We need to get this country healthy again. I mean, he's at least admitted that. Hi, 5 minutes, yes, comrade. So, he does that. So we've got Sheriff Putin. He's like Putin Mighty Mouse. He's Mr. Health. Look at the Sochi Olympics, right? Reminds you a little bit sometimes of Adolf Hitler, doesn't it? It's a little scary here, right? You say, well, remember Hitler, we're going to have the youth movement. Everybody's going to be healthy again. We're going to build Russia up again. Germany, Hitler going to build Germany up again. Germany was pushed down unfairly. We need to come back. This is the kind of thing that I think makes us nervous, right? How far would this go? How far will this go? Is Putin Adolf Hitler? Well, if we had to say what form of government has emerged in these post-Stalinist, post-Maoist societies, it's a mild form of fascism. You've got one-party rule. You've got big industrialists and tycoons who are in cahoots with the dictatorship, right? Emphasis on sports, patriotism, nationalism, making Russia great again, making China great again, or Kazakhstan or Belarus. Basically, most of the communist bloc, that as we used to understand it, that is, I don't mean the captured satellites, which are trying to become democracies, but former Soviet Union, China, they are semi-fascist states. And therefore, we thought we got rid of fascism at the end of World War II. Not really, it's there, isn't it? In this format of kind of state capitalism, one-party dictatorship, fun and games for the people, one leader at the top, or group at the top. They might not be as aggressive now as Hitler was, but what scared us when Putin started up on Ukraine, which is something I'm going to talk about tomorrow, was he started sounding like Hitler. Remember, Hitler would say, the German people are being persecuted in Sudetenland. What was Putin saying about the situation in Ukraine? The Russian people, Russian Ukrainians are in danger. They're being persecuted by right-wing, anti-Russian fascists in Ukraine. I'm not going to leave them dangling there. Then the Anschluss comes. Would we compare Austria to Crimea? Hitler basically managed to take over Austria through a nice quick little coup. Putin managed to take over Crimea in a quick little coup. And then what comes next? A whole string of cities from Odessa all the way up to Russia. Groups start showing up, taking over City Hall, town after town. So the alarm bells went off in the West. The alarm bells went off in the West, and therefore we really quickly started to see a major threat in Vladimir Putin. So why was he was indeed being risky. He had so much power for so long that he was able to take risks, probably make mistakes. We'll talk more about that, tomorrow. But was he becoming dangerous? Did he need to be made to sober up? Because normally he was cautious, technocratic. All of a sudden he seemed to throw caution to the wind and push. Created a fright in the West. Now he's speaking calmly, he's trying to calm things down and so on, but given our own history in Western Europe and Eastern Europe and all that happened in the 20th century, we decided that we had to show him that he couldn't get away with rebuilding the Soviet Union into a mighty empire. And so NATO cranked up and the rest of it, the sanctions, and that's where we ended up. So at this point, it seems as if the resistance from the West has certainly calmed him down. He doesn't look as if he's going to be taking any more rash actions, gobbling up territory. But, there's a warning. How did you feel about the markets over the last 15 days or so? And I used to argue that if world capitalism, put it that way, collapsed, Chinese economy had collapsed, then this tendency to be fascist states where you say, well, Hitler put everyone to work after the Depression, that's my model. That's all lurking there in the background. I think when Putin says he's got plans, in case there's economic collapse, I think the plans are exactly build roads, weapons, build up the military, something you kind of borrow out of Hitler's playbook for how you put people to work. So, I say leaving, as we end and get ready to do Q&A, I say we can understand what Putin did, how he managed to get in power. We can understand that it's not at all democratic, that the system is pretty firm because even though the economy is going down, 80% of the people support him, that in a real crisis, he'll try to mobilize the military, the KGB, and the oligarchs to save their necks into some kind of an even more proto-fascist solution to keeping the public working. So what is Putin finally? Sometimes I'd say, well, he's a Russian pretending to be a Prussian. He doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke. He wants everything technocratically ordered, law and order. There's a kind of a Germanic tradition there. And in the back of his mind on his great foreign policy alliances, not really China he's comfortable with, but he would really love a firm alliance with Germany. Because as the old German nationalists and Russian nationalists say, if Germany and Russia cooperate, nobody can get in their way. He speaks German. He was in Dresden, right? So you watch him try to repair relations with Germany. Meanwhile, Angela Merkel, who heard all this kind of Adolf Hitler-like resonance out of Putin's behavior, decided to back off from the German alliance with Russia and impose sanctions on him because she doesn't like the smell of the way things are going. So, gosh, who is Vladimir Putin? Is he the man who made Russia great again? Not quite, because most of his greatness, and this is what I argued in Moscow when they kind of kicked me out last time I was over there at a conference, I said, it isn't what he did that saved your economy, it's what China did. Because China drove the prices of all your exports up, created the high oil prices, created the high copper prices, created the high prices for coking coal and all of that stuff. China did that. And if China hadn't driven those prices up, and your government hadn't gotten control over those industries and taxed them, you'd be nowhere. And if those prices come down again, where are you going to be? Huh? And they had no answer. They went through the years of all the fat years and they weren't ready for the lean years. The price is down now. They see no easy way out. They don't see the prices jumping quickly. So Russia's heading into at least recession, at least. And again, what makes people feel better, maybe a little more nationalism, national pride. But so far the Russian people have not blamed Putin for the low oil prices. They're still with the guy. They're still with him. Like it or not, he's there. So, hey, thanks very much. Now let's do questions. Okay, well, you asked a question about control of the social media. No, there's a lot of social media stuff going on in Russia. He hasn't shut all of that down. His main worries are, of course, the big media. He's got the big media under his control. Your problem with the social media is your job, your future. Because they've asked people, there was one very interesting poll where they threw in a question, do you think that when people are answering the polls, they take into consideration consequences for what might happen at work? So we all have to remember this now when we're dealing with polling information from Russia. I don't like to give information over the telephone, and I'm in a free country. If you're in a country where it's one party dominated, you're going to be careful about expressing negative opinion about the president or his policies. So really getting a measure on dissent is hard, although when they do voting, we find in other things it's about 10% willing to do dissent. Now, yeah, there is a group of military mothers who provided information about sons who were killed over in eastern Ukraine when Putin didn't want anybody reporting on that. There are dissident groups, but Putin's machine will infiltrate them. And there can be all kinds of subtle intimidation. And I would say the same thing. One of my friends in Moscow used to say, well, he doesn't go over to whatever democratic group because it's so full of Putin's people. They infiltrate him to make sure that they're right there on the inside, right? And they know what's going on, that he doesn't want to go near them. So it gets very hard, you know, if you really have a good mastermind playing these games with people in intimidation, to know who's a real dissident, who's a half dissident, who's working for whom, what's really going on. So there's a tendency to like mind your own business and just do your job. And as far as the alternative to the petro, there isn't any. And so right now there are really absolutely good discussions that are covered on Russian TV where they're just trying to figure out what are we going to do, you know, where will the income come from? And Putin's former Minister of Finance named Kudrin was really a great mind, respected all over the world. He just said, you know, we don't have any easy solution to this. And it isn't easy. Look around at all the countries in the world that exported oil and so on. How many of them ever managed to really get a good balanced economy? Especially developing countries that had to do, say Brazil, where is it now? You know, with inflation and the rest of it, because commodity prices are down. This is not easy to do. It's nothing you can do overnight.
Yeah, where did Sergei Brin back?
Right.
Isn't he a Russian originally, Sergei Brin, the internet and so on?
Yeah.
A fun question, will Putin get married in church?
Oh, yeah, okay, that's it. I really avoided his sexual life and his divorces and all of that stuff, right? Who knows whether he'll get married in church. For Christmas, he went to a little parish somewhere without any wife or any girlfriend, all right? He always shows up on the news for Christmas. And by the way, I forgot to mention Santa Putin. Oh, yes. this year, you know, watching the Russian news, here's little Manya living over here, and her mom's a single mom, and they're poor, and she's a great student, and she's dreaming of getting a computer. So she wrote a little letter to the Kremlin, to Vladimir Putin, and lo and behold, somebody read the letter, and little Manya's got a computer and a bicycle and whatever. So I said, that's great. Now he's going to get 1 million letters from all over Russia. But so he also did Santa Putin this year.
And Gary Kasparov, who's living in exile in New York, is on a book tour now. Of course, his book's all about Putin, and he made a lot of points about the role of the West in capitulating. One of the things I heard him speak, and one of the things he said, referring to the oil issue, is that he saw Putin's involvement with Syria as a way of ultimately creating conditions that will help to drive up the price of oil and save.
Oh, goodness, okay.
Interested what you think about Kasparov's positions and in particular that point.
You ever see Kasparov? He's fun, he's brilliant, he's full of energy, and he's written a book, Winter is Coming, essentially saying that, you know, the falling demographics, the oil stuff, everything will make Russia crash. All right? We've heard that over and over again because that's true. So if you're Putin, what you would like to do is raise the price of oil, right? How are you going to raise the price of oil unless you knock Iraq or Saudi Arabia out of the oil market? So, I mean, some people would suspect, you know, that he has no interest in real peace in the Middle East for this reason. Because peace in the Middle East means another 10 million barrels a day coming out of Iraq in 10 years from now. It means Iranian natural gas flooding into Europe across a new pipeline, you know, across Turkey into Europe. Russia loses more of its oil sales and natural gas market share in Europe. The price comes down, so therefore it's nothing but a gloomy future. So you can save your money now on Kasparov. He doesn't have any political following in Russia, unfortunately, even though he's brilliant in the rest of it. So, got to be careful. Speak English great, have a Russian accent, be highly intelligent, come over here, dump on Putin, and we all applaud. But it doesn't mean that back in Russia, you've got a political party. Because Putin's making sure that the political space is filled up with Russia United people and the Communist Party and the Liberal Democratic Party, which are kind of two fake opposition parties that he uses to fill up the dissident space. So if you think you're going to organize a party all over Russia, collect enough votes, you know, to get your people into the National Assembly, it is very difficult. He's got it figured out. It ain't going to happen. So Kasparov's idea is everything goes to hell, and then what, a democratic general comes along? When things go to hell, you get dictators because people become insecure, right? So from my point of view, I don't know what to say here, except I'd rather see the price of oil come up a little, you know, and give them a chance over there, because otherwise it could be pretty bleak. It could be. That's why he says winter is coming. He can't make Russia great again. All right.
Well, several years ago, I heard that the natural gas was a business, and that America was subsidizing. Is that true?
What was the first part?
Of that, are we subsidizing their business of gas?
Are we subsidizing Russian natural gas business?
I forgot the name.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, the Russian national gas industry is state-controlled. This huge network of pipelines, thousands of miles going all over the place, even to China now, to Europe, they're state-controlled. Could we be subsidizing it? Well, you know, in some ways, if somebody bought shares in Gazprom or bought some of their bonds, we'd be helping them. But no, we're not. If anything, we're challenging them, because our goal is to take our cheap LNG, put it on boats, and take it to Europe. So our government has always been saying, don't buy Russian natural gas because you become dependent on evil Russia and it's better to buy American natural gas. And the Russians say, you know, that's an American pipe dream. It ain't going to happen because the cheaper gas, if it ever comes from anywhere, will be from the noble energy Israeli fields off Cyprus, the Eastern Mediterranean, up in the Arctic, off Russia, or from Turkmenistan, or from Iran. There's so much natural gas that we're not going to make it into the European market in any significant way.
What's it like in Russia today, the average person? Are they getting paid decent salaries? Is there food in the stores? Are roads being repaired and built?
What's it like for the average person? This is what the public opinion data, I think, is fair on this. They're still getting paid. They're worried that they're not going to be paid because they figure that if the price of oil collapses, then the government won't be able to pay their pensions and so on. So what Putin did, he said, I'm going to cut the budget by 10% next year, but I'm not cutting social welfare payments or pensions. And if you want to see a grim-looking gang, go on the Russian news and watch the meetings with the ministers who control, you know, the different pieces of the economy when Medvedev is saying we're cutting 10% and we're going to make it. And they're like, I've never seen them look so grim. So people fear that if the income isn't coming in from the natural gas sales and oil and all, then the Kremlin won't have the money unless they print it through inflation. So he's cutting, but he says he won't cut social welfare. We'll see. I mean, sure. You want to see, there's never been more fun in Russia in modern times. I mean, Christmas markets, everything's all lit up. They're having a great old good time. They just finished 2 weeks of no work because they get to celebrate New Year's twice. They have our New Year's, and then they have what they call Stary Novy God, which is the old Russian calendar New Year's. So they take the whole block of time from around Christmas through recently, like 2 weeks after our New Year's, like last week. Nobody works, they just have a grand old good time and party. So, I mean, they're partying, but they're worrying that the party's going to be over.
I have a question for Comrade Gorilsky.
Yes. I don't call myself that anymore because I get so angry with Putin and his boys over killing people and all that stuff. So,
what is the role of the Communist Party in Russia, and what is Putin's relationship to the Communist Party?
Comrade Richard, the answer to that is, I try to explain the picture that if you want to fill the political space with people who aren't dangerous to you, it's okay to keep a Communist Party of the Russian Federation going, KPRF it's called, and its head is Zyuganov. He comes on talk shows on TV, all right? And he's always supporting, a stronger, tougher, we must make Russia great again line. He's no threat to Putin. So that's where they are. They fill a space. The same with Zhirinovsky's Liberal Democratic Party, as they call it. So you got half the political space, 50-something, 60%, Putin's party. You get another chunk of the communists and another chunk of these proto-fascists. And there's room, 5%? 7% for real dissent? And even then, they can't get the signatures to get their candidates on the ballot. So Communist Party is there to satisfy the old people, but it's supporting Putin. That's the answer. Okay, thanks very much, folks. It was my pleasure.